Today I am here in Tottenham with Ted Fullerton, award-winning Canadian artist who works in painting, drawing, printmaking, and sculpture. In addition to his art practice, Ted has also been an active curator and educator, having taught at Georgian College, School of Design and Visual Art as professor and head of the Fine Art program until a few years ago. Ted, before we begin, I'd like to thank you for inviting us to your home studio and for talking to us about your upcoming exhibition at the Newmarket Old Town Hall, Figure in a Landscape.
It's a pleasure to have you all here.
Ted, you have been practicing art for over 40 years. Many have described you as a conceptual artist and your work as humanist. Do you feel these descriptors accurately describe you and your practice?
Yes, I do. Conceptual art is a genre all on its own, but my work does have a very strong conceptual foundation to it. Essentially, I don't really think of my work as working in a thematic way, but I do like to reference it as a movement of works, where I have a thought, an idea, and I explore that idea until I feel that I've exhausted it, or if I'm starting to repeat myself. From there, it usually evolves into another body of work. So content and meaning are extremely important to what I'm trying to say within my work. And humanist, definitely. I deal with the figure, the human form. And when I'm dealing with the figure, I'm thinking of the complexities of what it means to be alive, and essentially as mirror and metaphor. That's really my intent in light of utilizing the figure within my work. But I think it's really important to identify that my work is symbolic. That is difficult at times to explain, and I think the best way for me to explain that is it's like poetry. And I don't mean it's poetic. I mean within poetry, words take on meaning beyond their initial intent. Within my work, images take on meaning beyond their initial intent. And as I go to poetry, almost every time I read a poem that I love, I tend to engage with it in a very different way and experience it a very different way because of that symbolic inference of words. And that's my hope that when people come to my work, that the breadth of interpretation and experience is very broad. Yes, I have intent behind what I want to say, but I like it to be open for interpretation and to pose new questions on an ongoing basis.
Awesome, thank you. Can you please elaborate on the ideas you want to get across in your upcoming exhibition in Newmarket, Figure in a Landscape?
Well, first of all, Logan, I am so pleased that you went in the direction of curating the exhibition with the Figure in the Landscape. Those works, which are paintings on board, have never been exhibited before. The impetus behind that body of work actually comes from two works that I greatly admire. And one is by the artist Paul Gauguin, and the other is by the poet Ezra Pound. Paul Gauguin did a painting, and the title of it is called Christ in the Mount of Olives. And I'm really not too sure if he named the painting or not, because it's a self-portrait of himself within the wilderness. And my engagement with that work and my experience in engaging with that work is that he is alone, vulnerable, emotionally, psychologically, physically, within the landscape. And it's really interesting in how we look at the landscape these days. We see it as other than us, but we are actually other than it. We're displaced. And that work spoke to me really quite profoundly in light of that experience. In fact, one of the paintings that you selected to go into the work is an homage to Paul Gauguin and that particular work. I approached it in a very different kind of way, but it definitely is pulled from that particular painting that I'm speaking of. The Ezra Pound poem that I noted is called The Tree, and I can't recite poem, but the first line goes something to the effect as, "I stood still amid the wood and became a tree." And for me, that spoke of unification. It spoke of the ability to merge and to come back to something that we initially somehow feel alienated with. So that aspect of union, that aspect of being displaced and then coming together, those are ongoing themes within my work, displacement and unification.
Thank you for that insight. And I recall you having a particular experience when you painted some of your works actually in your outside
Yeah, my studio. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. It's I have a couple of studios. Obviously, the one that we're in right now, and I have a small printmaking studio that was built into the house. But we're also fortunate to have an open air studio in Northern Ontario, and it's a very obscure place. You have to get there by boat, but it's an open air studio. Essentially, I'm protected by things like the bugs, etc., because it's all screened from ceiling to floor, all the way around. So essentially, I feel like I'm actually working within the landscape itself, even though I am protected a wee bit. But the first painting that I did that dealt with figure in a landscape was done there. What I was trying to do, and actually that is the first painting right there. What I was trying to do is that thinking about nature and thinking about the creative process, there's a natural architectonics that happen. In other words, there's a natural kind of building and progressive aspect with that. Yeah, there's an element of sweeping back a wee bit, a reductive element, but there's this empathetic sort of growth quality to nature, to the actual physicality of making a work. However, within nature and within humanity itself, there's a destructive element. Nature is very different than human destruction. But within nature, there is an element of it being, it's able to recover and actually build even sometimes stronger than it was before. And arguably, humanity can do that as well. So with this body of work, I was thinking, is there a way to introduce a component that has a very, very aggressive element to it, and yet coexist with it in a kind of progressive, creative way? And I was thinking, well, what kind of tool, what kind of thing can really evoke that kind of visual expression? And it was a chainsaw. It may have had a lot to do with where we were, but the works have an engagement of the chainsaw with the painting itself. And what I found interesting is I was trying to merge them so they could coexist in a very positive kind of way. But what surprised me in doing that is the ability to actually kind of unearth aspects of the substrate that was there, which was not that different than in nature, unearthing the roots, etc. So there was something I discovered and experienced that was something I hadn't anticipated within that initial body of work.
Thank you. What are the underlying themes visitors can expect to see when they visit your show?
I'm interested in the creative, destructive aspect of nature and human nature. And nature is ongoing and eternal. Human nature is finite and terminal. But yet there is this element of coexistence and separation that interests me. And that is the underlying theme within a lot of the work with regard to figure in a landscape. But there's also another component that interests me, and that is the term called axis mundi. And philosophically, that is a place where you're actually between the aspect of earth and the mystical, that point of in between, where a sense of knowing and knowledge can't be expressed in words, you just understand it all. And I think everyone has experienced that in some kind of way. For me, it's frequent within the studio, but it could be somebody on the golf course hitting whatever they hit, or in a canoe or whatever. But there's this point of axis mundi, this point of understanding that intrigues me and interests me, and I wanted that within the paintings, but it also exists within some of the sculptures that you've selected for the exhibition as well. Jacob's Ladder would be a good example of that particular work. It's a biblical story, and I'm not really interested in biblical stories. I'm interested in the symbolic inference of them. And in that particular story, the ladder, Jacob sees this ladder, and it's a connection between earth and heaven, and angels were moving up and down. And they never really explain what that's about. But essentially, it's this connect. A tree is an archetype. And as an archetype, it also makes reference symbolically to the axis mundi, and that is the roots are firmly in the ground. The leaves, the branches are reaching up towards the sky, towards the light, but in between is the trunk, and that is the mediation between the two. That becomes the axis mundi, and it's a beautiful symbol for that. So hence the aspect of figure in the wilderness, some of the sculptures that you've selected that deal with that aspect of knowing, or the idea of home, which one finds internally or within place or within environment.
Thank you for that insight. What experiences in your private life or public career do you feel was pivotal to your artistic development?
I've been asked this question a few times, but usually it's framed, did you always know you were going to be an artist, right? And the answer is, I didn't know how to put words to it, but the answer was yes. Ever since I can remember, there was a great sense of satisfaction and fulfillment in making things, in creating things, in drawing. And I was very fortunate in public school, in middle school, and in high school, in particular in high school, an art teacher named Jim Pollard. I was always supported and encouraged whenever answering a question. I think I'm referring to Mr. Pollard at this point. Whenever I posed a question, there was always another question being posed, right? And so it was this continuation, and it always related to artwork. But what was the real pivotal point is when I went into my post-secondary studies at the Ontario College of Art. When I arrived there, I felt finally I was at home. There was like-minded people that were interested in the kind of things that I was interested in, that wanted to explore ideas, that there was no idea crazy enough that you couldn't explore. But I was very fortunate within my first year to have met and introduced to the artist Frederick Hagen, who lives in Newmarket. And in fact, my first introduction to the city of Newmarket was an invitation by Fred Hagen and his wife Isabel within my first year to come up for dinner and visit his studio, which, in thinking back, was really a significant experience for me and a privilege. Fred and I, he was very, very supportive of what I was doing at the college. When in my first year, I would be kind of hiding certain things that I wanted to express because I didn't think that that was the kind of thing that should be done. He was peeping over my shoulder, I think, one time and saw this kind of things that I was working on that I kept private. And he talked to me at great length about that and encouraged me that those are the kind of things that I should be bringing forward. So anyways, when I finished my formal studies, Fred ended up being a very good friend. I mean, we traveled together, we canoed together, we even worked together in the studio at times. He's at our place up north and has done things up there. And we became very close. He's my mentor.
Thank you. Those are all the questions we have for today. I appreciate your time and I look forward to the exhibition.
Me too.